Imagine standing at a crossroads, your heart heavy with every what if. What if you'd taken that job, chased that dream, or said I love you one more time? That's where we all are sometimes. And that's why I'm diving into Midnight Library by Haig today, a book that feels like a warm hand pulling you out of regret's quicksand. And I promise, by the end of this video, you'll see why it's a map for fixing what feels broken. This isn't just a story. It's a mirror for anyone who's ever felt stuck, like their life's a string of wrong turns. Nora Seed, our hero, is you and me. She's lost her job, her cat, her brother's trust, and thinks she's failed at everything. Music, love, purpose. But then she finds the Midnight Library, a magical place where every book lets her live a different life. From rock star to scientist to mom, each one a chance to undo her regrets. Sound like a dream? It's more. It's a wake-up call that every choice, even the painful ones, builds who you are. In the next 40 minutes, we'll walk through Nora's journey, from her darkest night to a truth that'll make you rethink your own. And I'll show you how her story solves the big problems we all face: feeling lost, hating your past, or fearing you're not enough. This video's theme, your life, right now, is the answer you've been searching for. Whether you're battling a bad day or a big doubt, struggles, plus practical ways to live lighter, just like Nora did when she chose herself under a rainy sky. Let's start this journey together. Trust me, you won't want to miss what this library reveals. Nora Seed is a 30-something woman whose life feels like a slowly deflating balloon. She's got a philosophy degree collecting dust, a stack of failed dreams, a brother she barely talks to, and a recently deceased cat named Voltaire who might have been the only creature that understood her. Her days are filled with what-ifs, and her nights with insomnia-fueled existential crises. One day, everything hits the fan. She loses her job, misses her antidepressants, and finds herself standing at the edge of despair. That night, she decides to end it all, convinced the world wouldn't miss her. But instead of dying, she wakes up in a place between life and death. The Midnight Library, a mystical, infinite space filled with books, each representing a different version of her life had she made different choices. Enter Mrs. Elm, Nora's childhood librarian and now celestial spirit guide, who is equal parts wise and sass. Mrs. Elm explains that Nora can pick any book and step into that version of her life to see what it's like. The catch? If she finds a life that makes her truly happy, she can stay. If not, she returns to the library until the clock strikes permanent midnight. Nora, skeptical but curious, because who wouldn't be, begins diving into lives like she's sampling ice cream flavors on a cosmic scale. What if she hadn't broken up with her ex-fiancé, Dan? What if she kept swimming and gone to the Olympics? What if she hadn't quit her band right before it got famous? Each life opens up a new world and a new set of joys, heartbreaks, and mild inconveniences like papaya allergies or awkward public speeches. This entire section is a hilarious, moving, and sometimes painfully relatable exploration of regret. The humor lies in how wildly unexpected some lives turn out, and the poignancy comes from realizing how easy it is to romanticize what could have been. Self-improvement-wise, it holds up a mirror. How often do we let fear stop us from trying? How often do we beat ourselves up over decisions that made sense at the time? Nora's journey through these alternate timelines gently but firmly reminds us, every decision shapes us, but none of them define us. You're not too late. You're just in a library waiting to pick your next book. Nora Seed, now a full-time traveler in the multiverse and part-time philosopher of regret, embarks on what can only be described as an emotional roller coaster with 1,000 loops. After the initial awe of discovering that every choice she didn't make is a life sitting patiently on a shelf, she becomes obsessed, no, enchanted with possibility. Who wouldn't be? Imagine being told, hey, you know all those choices you didn't make because you were scared, broke, tired, or just too into watching reruns of Friends. Well, guess what? You get to live them, all of them. It's like a cosmic choose-your-own adventure, with the added bonus that your emotional baggage gets unpacked in every scenario, whether you like it or not. The first few jumps are tentative, like dipping a toe in a lake that might be full of jellyfish or enlightenment. She lands in a life where she married Dan, her ex-fiancé, the one who once dreamed of opening a pub in the countryside. And guess what? He did. Only problem? He's a jerk. The pub smells like bad beer and broken dreams, and Nora finds herself drowning in this rustic fantasy turned nightmare. Turns out, Dan didn't want a partner. He wanted a personal assistant who could smile through passive-aggressive breakfasts. That life ends faster than you can say toxic masculinity, and she's yanked back into the library. Mrs. Elm ever the wise librarian slash universal therapist, gives her that knowing smile, the kind that says, "Told you so," but with love. Then comes a version of Nora where she became a glaciologist. Yes, a glaciologist, somewhere between age 10 and depression. She had forgotten she ever wanted to study glaciers. But in this life, she's famous, respected, and standing on ice that's thousands of years old. It sounds cool, pun intended, and it kind of is, until a near-death experience with a polar bear makes her rethink whether this version of herself really knows who she is or if she's just good at pretending. That's the thing with alternate lives. They often reflect the parts of ourselves we try to suppress. The glaciologist's life shows her she can be brave, intelligent, and adventurous, but it also reveals the loneliness that comes with constantly chasing achievement. When your life looks great on paper but feels hollow in your heart, is it really success? Next, she's a rock star. No, seriously. Her band, The Labyrinths, made it big in this life. She's touring the world, wearing leather jackets and eyeliner like a boss, and everyone want her autograph. Sounds amazing, right? Except fame is a full-time job that comes with anxiety, imposter syndrome, and people who treat you more like a product than a person. In this life, her bandmate Ravi is distant, and the music feels like a loop she can't escape. In moments between the applause, she hears silence, and not the good kind. She realizes she misses simplicity. She misses authenticity. This version of her is what the world would label successful. But internally, she's crumbling like a gluten-free cookie in a hurricane. And so the journey continues. A life where she has a daughter, full of warmth, love, and tiny fingers that hold her like she's the center of the universe. But even that life isn't perfect. Being a mother means sacrifice, relentless energy, and a level of responsibility that terrifies her. She loves that child, but she can't stay, not because she doesn't want to, but because it's not her life. The decisions leading up to that life were made by a version of her with a different heart at that time. And that, dear reader, is where Nora starts to see the point. She's not just trying on different outfits at the cosmic mall of existence. She's being handed mirrors in every timeline, each reflecting a version of herself. Some bitter, some brave, all flawed, all human. The humor in these life hops is often deliciously dark. One moment, she's a vegan motivational speaker with a YouTube channel called Seeds of Positivity, and the next, she's a chess champion who never learned how to make tea properly. Each timeline is like a sitcom written by the universe. But beneath the laughs is an undercurrent of aching truth. We're all haunted by the ghosts of our potential. We all wonder, what if? The tragedy isn't that we'll never know what could have happened. It's that we think knowing would make everything better. But as Nora learns, every choice we didn't make came with a different flavor of pain, growth, and joy. No life is void of suffering. The question isn't which life is perfect, it's which version of you can stand tall in the storm. And let's talk about the self-improvement goldmine buried in this mess of quantum chaos. Nora begins to recognize patterns. In every life, the versions of herself that thrived didn't necessarily have more money, more fame, or more romance. They had purpose. They had connection. They didn't avoid pain. They grew through it. She starts writing mental post-it notes. Just because it didn't happen doesn't mean I'm a failure. Or, you're not too old to change direction. You're just seasoned. Or even the more practical, don't marry Dan. Ever. No matter the timeline. Each life teaches her that regret is not a punishment. It's a teacher. And sometimes that teacher's lessons come in the form of being chased by a bear or playing an encore with a sore throat in Berlin. At one point, she lands in a life where she's just a regular Nora with a regular job at an animal shelter. And guess what? She's happy. Not the manic Instagram hashtag, blessed kind of happy, but the kind where you go to bed knowing you helped the dog find a home and made a good cup of coffee. It's mundane, it's real, and it hits her like a brick. Maybe happiness doesn't come from changing everything. Maybe it comes from changing how we see what we already have. By now, Nora's multiverse mileage is off the charts. She's beginning to understand the rhythm of this place. Enter a life, get whiplashed by emotions, realize it's not the one, and return to the library for her next cosmic spin. But with each life she samples, she's not just learning about who she could have been. She's learning who she is right now, deep down beneath the layers of regret, fear, and what-ifs that once defined her. In one life, she owns a shop, a cute little music store on a quiet English street, complete with vintage vinyl, friendly neighbors, and tea breaks that taste like nostalgia. She didn't become famous or rich. But she did follow through with her dream of spreading music. People in this life love her for her passion, her kindness, her ability to recommend the perfect song for a broken heart. She finds herself smiling more, relaxing into the rhythm of slow, intentional days. But again, it's not a perfect fit. This version of her took steps years ago that shaped this cozy life. And then Nora standing in it now feels like a tourist in someone else's happiness. It's lovely, but not hers. Another life sends her into academia. She's a celebrated philosopher, a published author, invited to speak at prestigious universities. She's quoting Aristotle over espresso and sparring ideas with intellectuals. On the surface, she's living the dream of that younger Nora who once believed philosophy could save the world, or at least make it less confusing. But then comes the emptiness, the loneliness of being surrounded by people who admire your brain but never ask about your heart. The pressure of constantly being the smartest person in the room. She realizes that intelligence without connection is like a library with no one to read the books. Impressive, but ultimately pointless. And that's when Nora begins to notice something strange. The more lives she lives, the faster they collapse. She'll be in a timeline for what feels like minutes before cracks start to show. An argument, a sinking feeling, a realization that this isn't it. Mrs. Elm explains that Nora's subconscious is starting to resist. The deeper Nora understands her own needs and desires, the harder it becomes to stay in a life that doesn't align with them. It's a brilliant metaphor. When you start understanding your worth, you can no longer stay where you're not truly seen. This realization hits Nora hard. It's not about finding a life where everything is perfect. It's about finding a life where she wants to be herself. That means accepting the messiness, the flaws, the weird moments. She reflects on how she's always tried to live up to someone else's standards. Her parents, her brothers, society's endless checklist of success. But in the Midnight Library, there's no audience, no performance. It's just Nora, bare and vulnerable, trying to rewrite the story she thought was finished. One particularly hilarious life has her as a motivational speaker touring the world. She's on stage in a power suit, dazzling people with phrases like "choose your reality" and "you are the author of your own book." The irony not lost on her, given she literally lives in a library of her own alternate autobiographies. It's over the top, but it teaches her something crucial. Sometimes, confidence isn't a byproduct of success. It's the prerequisite. You fake it, and then, of course, comes one of the most heartbreaking lives. The one where her brother Joe is still alive. In her root life, he was distant, detached, and struggling with addiction. But in this version, they're close. They talk about music and memories, joke about childhood, and she feels something she hasn't felt in years. Family. But here's the catch. This life required her to make a choice years ago. To support Joe in a specific moment when, in her original life, she hadn't known how. It's not about guilt. It's about awareness. She learns that being present in the small moments often has the biggest ripple effects. And just as she begins to settle into this life, feeling the warmth of belonging, she's pulled out again, this time with tears in her eyes and a soul full of longing. But she doesn't spiral. Not this time. Each life, even the painful ones, have been like puzzle pieces clicking into place. She starts seeing herself differently, not as someone broken or cowardly, but as someone trying, surviving, evolving. And the more she learns, the more she begins to ask a dangerous question. What if my root life wasn't a mistake? What if I just hadn't lived it fully yet? Cute. An identity crisis at interdimensional level. That's when Nora lands in a version of her life that isn't glamorous or tragic or wildly different. It's quiet, peaceful. It's the life where she did nothing remarkable, but she didn't run from her problems either. She worked through her mental health issues. She found a community. She volunteered at the shelter. She forgave herself. She sees in this life not a dazzling version of herself, but a healed one. And that hits harder than any rock concert or glacier expedition. Mrs. Elm, watching from the library, gives her another one of those magical librarian smiles. The kind that says, "You're getting it, finally." Nora realizes she's been living her life like it was a math equation. Choices equals outcome. But life's not math. It's music. It has rhythm, harmony, dissonance, improvisation. You don't solve life. You play it. And this is where the emotional shift becomes undeniable. Nora no longer wants to escape her root life. She wants to embrace it. Not to run back into it pretending everything is perfect, but to walk back with eyes wide open and say, all right, life, let's do this messy, weird, beautiful thing together. By now, Nora Seed has become something of a metaphysical globetrotter. She's experienced so many alternate realities that she's developed what might best be described as existential jet lag. She's seen herself as a mother, a pop star, a glaciologist, a barista, a cat saver, a yoga teacher, and even, briefly and confusingly, an Olympic swimmer. She's loved and been unloved. She's been rich, poor, alone, surrounded, bored, excited. But every single life, even the dazzling ones, comes with fine print. In one life, she's married to Dan, the man she almost married in her root life. At first, it seems perfect. He's attentive. The kitchen smells like fresh bread. They live in a lovely countryside house. But then she finds the cracks. Dan drinks too much. He's angry. He cheated. The life she once imagined as the one that got away turns out to be a cautionary tale. She learns that fantasy is often just reality with the sound turned off. And when you turn it back on, you hear the creaks in the floorboards and the arguments behind the door. Still, Nora keeps diving in because the library keeps offering chances. And with each new life, her focus shifts from what she missed out on to what really matters. At one point, she meets Hugo, a fellow slider hopping between lives, who tells her he's been doing this for ages. For him, it's a thrill. But for Nora, it's becoming something deeper. She doesn't want to collect lives like Pokemon cards. She wants to understand the point of life. What makes it worth living? What makes it hers? The humor of it all starts to hit her. Here she is, dead but not quite, sipping philosophical tea in a mystical library, getting reality checks from a ghost librarian. It sounds like a fever dream, but it's teaching her more than a lifetime of school ever could. Like how regret is a liar. It tells you that one choice doomed everything. But life is more forgiving than that. You don't need a perfect past to have a meaningful present. Sometimes your greatest growth sprouts from the messiest soil. In a life where she's a teacher, Nora finds herself unexpectedly happy. Not because it's glamorous, but because she's useful. She helps kids. She listens. She connects. She's not chasing headlines. She's changing lives one small kindness at a time. And it dawns on her. Maybe greatness isn't about accolades. Maybe it's about showing up consistently with empathy and courage, even on the days when no one's clapping. Then comes a life where Nora dies. Yes, dies again. A snowstorm, a fall, a reminder that every life, no matter how well lived, eventually ends. But it's not tragic, it's clarifying. Death, she realizes, isn't the enemy. Wasted time is. And if she returns to her root life, she doesn't want to spend another second thinking she's not enough. This epiphany becomes her compass. No longer is she asking, which life is the best? She's asking, which life allows me to be me? The answer isn't found in the fancy ones. It's not the glamorous jobs or the perfect relationships. It's in the simple things, petting a cat, laughing with a friend, watching snow fall without rushing it. She revisits her regrets like old letters, not with shame, but curiosity. The swimming career she abandoned? It wasn't failure. It was her body asking for rest. The band she quit? It led to deeper, more meaningful paths. Her broken relationships? They were classrooms in disguise. Every crack in her past becomes a place where light gets in. Back in the midnight library, the books are beginning to shake. Something is changing. The foundation trembles. Mrs. Elm explains, you're close to making your decision. Nora is not afraid. For the first time, she's excited. Because this isn't about escaping. It's about returning to her root life. Not as a woman defeated, but as one reborn. The Midnight Library is shaking like it's built on a fault line of forgotten dreams. The shelves tremble. Books fall open like they've waited centuries to confess their secrets. Even Mrs. Elm, the ever-calm librarian, looks rattled. She tells Nora something shocking. The library isn't infinite after all. It's tethered to Nora's will to live. And that thread is fraying fast. If Nora doesn't make a choice soon, it might all collapse along with her. But here's the twist. Nora isn't afraid anymore. Not of dying, not of failing, not of being too late. The very lives that once tempted her into regret have now become fuel. She understands now that no life is perfect. There's no version where pain is eliminated, only versions where you learn to dance with it better. That realization? It hits harder than any plot twist. She thinks about her root life, the one she wanted to abandon, the one that seemed like a graveyard of lost potential. But now, she sees it through a different lens. That life has possibilities too. Not flashy ones, maybe, but real ones. Friends she can reconnect with. A brother who still loves her, even if they've drifted. Music she can return to, not for fame, but for joy. And most importantly, a version of herself who no longer believes she's broken.
In one of her last visited lives, Nora is simply happy. Not wildly successful, not famous, not surrounded by fireworks, just content. She works in a small shop, volunteers at an animal shelter, reads poetry in parks. She laughs easily, she breathes deeply, and it clicks. Happiness isn't a jackpot. It's a quiet decision you make every day to keep going, even when it's hard. The final choice isn't dramatic. Nora doesn't leap into the abyss or climb some emotional Everest. She simply chooses to live. And the moment she does, the library begins to disintegrate like it's made of stardust. The books dissolve. Mrs. Elm smiles, sad, proud, peaceful. She tells Nora, "You were never trapped. You just needed to remember you could leave." Then poof, gone. Nora wakes up, back in her root life, not in a glittering mansion or holding an award, but on the floor, in her flat, gasping for air, alive. She calls for help. She apologizes to her neighbor. She smiles at a child. She visits her brother. She begins again. This time, not looking backward at regrets, but forward with curiosity. She takes up swimming, not competitively, just for the rhythm. She joins a band. Not to tour, but to jam. She works at the local shop, not forever, but for now. She adopts a cat. Not the one she lost, but one who needed a home. And she starts writing again, not because anyone asked her to, but because she finally has something to say.
In one of the book's most powerful moments, Nora realizes, the point of life isn't to avoid suffering. It's to find meaning inside it. And meaning doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, try again tomorrow. With that, Nora steps into the world. Not the perfect life, but her possible one. The only one that ever truly belonged to her. Waking up was not what Nora expected. It wasn't some movie moment, no symphony in the background or blinding white light. Just the beep of a heart monitor, the sterile scent of disinfectant, and the hum of fluorescent lights above her head. But within that ordinary moment was something extraordinary, life. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel like she had woken up by mistake. She had chosen this, her life, the one she once begged to escape. It was no longer a punishment, it was a path, a story still being written. At first, everything felt unreal. She was sluggish, her limbs heavy, her thoughts scattered. The hospital room felt both too small and too wide, the clock ticking like a drumbeat of her second chance. A nurse came in, smiling warmly, and said, "You gave us a scare." Nora didn't know how to respond. Should she apologize? Laugh? Cry? Instead, she just said, "Thanks for not giving up on me." It wasn't poetry, but it was a start. The days that followed were filled with simple victories. Eating toast without crying, sitting upright without feeling dizzy, making it through an hour without spiraling into shame. There were setbacks too, panic attacks that hit her like invisible punches. The weight of regret still haunted her like a low whisper in the corners of her mind. But there was also resolve, a flicker that said, not today, maybe not tomorrow either, but someday. Someday she would wake up and not feel like an imposter in her own skin. She spent her recovery reading, journaling, and sketching mind maps of her future. Some days the pages were filled with hopeful plans. Join a book club, try salsa dancing, volunteer. Other days, the pages just said, breathe or don't give up, and that was enough. Nora realized she didn't need to map out an entire life. She just had to want it, really want it. Not because someone else told her to, but because she deserved it. By the time Nora left the hospital, spring was arriving. Not the cinematic kind with perfectly blooming flowers and birds that harmonized like a Disney chorus. More like muddy sidewalks, aggressive daffodils, and unpredictable wind. But Nora welcomed it. She walked slowly, a bit like someone learning to move again. Not just physically, but spiritually. Every step felt like a quiet negotiation between who she was and who she was becoming. One of the first things she did was visit the local library. Not the metaphorical one suspended in midnight mist, but the actual brick-and-mortar place that smelled like paper and nostalgia. It was there she found Mrs. Elm, not the ageless celestial version, but the real woman, now older, softer, in a wheelchair, her eyes like crinkled paperbacks, worn but full of stories. When Nora walked in and said, "Hi, Mrs. Elm," the librarian looked up and smiled like the sun breaking through cloudy memory. They talked for hours. Nora tried to explain everything about the library between life and death, the infinite lives, the regrets and realizations. Mrs. Elm didn't fully understand, but she listened, nodded, and at one point said, "Sounds like your brain gave you a rather magical book club." Nora laughed so hard she snorted, and for the first time in ages, she didn't feel embarrassed by it. She felt alive. That visit sparked something. Nora began volunteering at the library twice a week. She shelved books, recommended novels, and quietly saved a corner table for people who looked like they needed a little escape. She didn't preach about regrets or lecture about life. She simply offered kindness, and that was enough. She began to see herself not as someone who needed rescuing, but as someone who could be the rescue. At night, she journaled, not just about her day, but about what she noticed. The way children giggled when they saw pop-up books, how one man always borrowed gardening books, but never checked them out, just read them standing by the window, how the librarian with blue glasses always hummed jazz when no one was looking. These tiny observations became her meditation. They grounded her, gave her proof that life didn't need to be epic to be meaningful. And slowly, the world grew brighter, not in color, but in connection. Her neighbor, Alan, the grumpy cat man, started nodding at her in the hallway. A barista complimented her earrings. Her brother texted back. She wasn't winning awards, or writing bestsellers, or giving TED Talks on resilience. She was just there, and that was miraculous in its own quiet way. Nora began to realize something astonishing. You don't have to do everything to do something meaningful. That maybe, just maybe, you could be valuable without being extraordinary. She started letting go of the pressure to live a life worth writing about, and instead focused on living a life worth living. Sometimes that meant doing absolutely nothing on a rainy Sunday, but drinking hot chocolate and rewatching old British sitcoms. And guess what? The universe didn't implode. Her relationship with her family began to thaw, too. Not overnight, but in awkward, wonderful fits and starts. Her brother Joe invited her to one of his gigs. He was still chasing the dream, but now he looked more grounded, less like he was running from something and more like he was running toward it. After the show, he said, "You seem different, happier." Nora didn't respond with a dramatic monologue. She just smiled and said, "Yeah, I think I am." Even her old regrets began to shift. They didn't vanish. They just lost their sharpness. When she thought about the lives she could have lived, they no longer made her ache with loss. Instead, they became stories. Roads not taken, yes, but roads that showed her what she valued. She learned to appreciate that the beauty of life wasn't in maximizing every potential outcome like a stock portfolio. It was in being present in the one you chose. She adopted a stray cat, named him Schrodinger, and laughed at the irony. He was equal parts chaos and cuddle, but he made her laugh when he knocked over her plants, and that was something. Her apartment became a home, not because it was perfect, but because it echoed with laughter, music, and the occasional loud meow. She still had down days, still battled anxiety, still wondered if she was doing enough. But the difference now, she kept going. She called friends. She asked for help. She forgave herself. She learned that being fixed wasn't the goal. Being human was. Messy, flawed, hopeful, trying. It was a Tuesday, one of those gray, uneventful ones that usually slip through memory like sand through fingers, when Nora realized she hadn't thought about death in a long time. Not in a fearful way, not in a morbid way, but in a "that's not my exit plan anymore" way. She was walking through the park, Schrodinger in a backpack with a little bubble window. Yes, she had become that person. When it hit her, she was curious about the future. Not terrified, not dreading, curious. That alone felt like a miracle. She started saying yes more often, not to every whim, but to the things that sparked a flicker. Yes to taking a weekend trip with a creative courage group. Yes to mentoring a teenage girl at the library who reminded her of herself. Yes to baking scones, even if they came out looking like sad bricks. She found joy in the attempt, not just the outcome. Life became less about performing and more about participating. Sometimes, she still woke up with that strange heaviness on her chest, as if her body remembered what her mind was trying to let go of. But she learned to speak gently to herself on those mornings. She'd say things like, "Okay, it's a hard one today," or "we've made it through worse," or when she was really struggling, "tea first, everything else later." It wasn't magical thinking. It was just kindness. That kindness extended outward too. She became someone people could talk to, not because she had all the answers, but because she didn't pretend to. She listened. She didn't say, "It'll all be okay." She said, "Yeah, that's really hard, and you're not alone." And somehow, those words were more comforting than the most eloquent pep talk. One evening, as she closed the music shop, she caught her reflection in the glass door. She looked content, not glowing or radiant or freshly Instagram filtered, just content. And it startled her. For so long, she had measured her worth by her pain, by her ability to survive the storm. But now, she was Maya. One of the strangest things about healing, Nora discovered, was how quiet it could be. There was no parade, no soundtrack swelling in the background, no neon sign blinking "You did it" over her head. It just happened. A gradual softening. A moment here, a breath there. It was in the way she no longer winced at silence, no longer filled empty spaces with panic or performance. She'd sit on her balcony with a cup of tea, Schrödinger curled at her feet, and let the world hum around her. The night sky, once oppressive in its vastness, had become a thing of wonder again. She downloaded a stargazing app and started learning the names of constellations. Orion, Cassiopeia, Lyra. She'd lie on a blanket in the park and whisper, "Hey, I remember you," to the stars. The cosmos that once made her feel small now made her feel connected. Every twinkle was a reminder that she, too, was a part of something grand, mysterious, and still unfolding. And romance? Oh, that sneaky subplot of life. It didn't barge in like a rom-com, lead with a bouquet and unresolved trauma. It came softly, slowly, in the form of Ravi, the quirky math teacher who ran chess club at the library. They bonded over a shared love of Radiohead, terrible puns, and tea that tasted like regret. He swore by Earl Grey. She preferred chai. Their first date was awkward and full of nervous laughter. But by the third, she found herself smiling just at the sound of his laugh. Ravi didn't try to save her. He didn't ask about the library between life and death. He just saw her as she was. He'd say things like, "You think too much," and "You make weird sound effects when you concentrate." And it didn't feel like criticism. It felt like affection, like someone turning on a light and inviting her in. They took things slow. She liked it that way. She wasn't in a rush to be someone's everything. She was still learning how to be her own. But Ravi was patient, curious, and funny in a way that made life feel lighter. They'd walk. Spring came early that year, as if the universe itself wanted to encourage Nora's slow blooming. Trees burst into pink blossoms with a kind of reckless optimism that she admired. Unapologetically bold, a little messy, and completely unconcerned with who might be watching. She began to adopt that energy in her own life. She wore brighter colors, laughed louder, and started giving genuine compliments to strangers. "Nice scarf," she'd say. "You got a great smile." At first it felt forced, but then something shifted. It became real. Joy, she discovered, was a muscle flabby at first, but stronger with practice. At the library, yes, the real one, not the midnight in-between place, she began volunteering again. She read to children in the afternoons, helping them find their own ways into stories. Some were shy, some wild, some couldn't sit still for longer than 5 seconds. But she saw herself in them, in their questions, in their wide eyes, in their wonder. One day, a little girl asked, "Were you ever sad?" Nora paused for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, a lot actually." The girl blinked. "But you're happy now?" Nora smiled. "Most days, and that's enough." That became her motto. Most days, and that's enough. She started teaching basic piano lessons again. Not as a big career move, but just because it brought her joy. Her first student, a retired plumber named Gary, said, "I want to play Let It Be before I die." Nora replied, "Then let's make it happen, Gary." And they did, badly, repeatedly, but with so much laughter that it felt like a Beatles concert every Tuesday night. Eventually, Gary nailed the chorus, cried a little, and insisted on bringing her a fruitcake to celebrate. "Don't eat it," he warned. "It's more symbolic than edible." With every passing week, her life became less about avoiding pain and more about embracing what was possible. She still had scars. Some regrets still whispered at night, but they didn't define her anymore. One sunny afternoon, the local radio station called the music shop Nora now helped manage. "We're doing a feature on people who've rediscovered their passion later in life," the host said. "Would you be willing to come on air and talk about your story?" Nora hesitated. The idea of being the story again felt strange, but she remembered something Mrs. Elm once told her in the midnight library. Your story matters because you're the only one who can tell it like you. So she said yes. The interview was casual, fun. The host asked about her favorite song, currently Heroes by David Bowie. Her most embarrassing performance, a school recital where she played chopsticks upside down in panic, and how she found her way back to music. I got lost, Nora said. Really lost. But I think sometimes being lost is part of the route to finding what you really care about. The host asked her one last question before wrapping up. If you could go back and talk to your younger self, say the one who thought there was nothing left to live for, what would you tell her? Nora thought for a long time. Then she said, I'd tell her that hope doesn't always come in fireworks. Sometimes it's just a quiet whisper that says, not yet, stay. That line went semi-viral. People started writing it in journals, on sticky notes, even tattooing it. Not yet, stay. It became a kind of accidental movement, gentle and personal, but powerful in its simplicity. And while Nora didn't seek attention, it gave her a platform to talk more openly about mental health, about recovery, about the messy, non-linear magic of staying alive long enough to be surprised by yourself. Meanwhile, Ravi became a comfortable constant. They weren't living together, didn't rush into labels, but their Sunday brunches became sacred. Their debates about whether cats could understand sarcasm. Ravi said yes. Nora said they invented it, were oddly romantic. There was no grand, cinematic proposal, no whirlwind drama.